Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for making time for us today. We're excited to share how Next Level Infoblox global server load balancing solution integrated with DNS can lower CapEx and OpEx to keep your networks and applications available and running, and at the same time deliver network visibility from a single pane of glass and all at a significantly lower cost. Again, thank you. My name is Bob Rose. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager located in our Tacoma, Washington office, and I will be moderating today's discussion. And we're fortunate to have with us today Senior Product Manager Roger Barlow from our Santa Clara headquarters. Welcome, Roger.
Thanks, Bob.
So before we get started and into the good stuff, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. We are recording today's event. We'll publish it online through infoblox.com, and we'll also be sending out a link after the call so that you can view it again or pass it on perhaps to a colleague that may have missed the presentation. In addition, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat window in the Zoom console. We will try to answer them in real time. But we'll make time also at the end for Q&A. And then also, we have a couple of polling questions for you today. We'd really appreciate your feedback so that we can better tailor the content to your interests and be able to answer your questions more appropriately. And then finally, we have an offer for you today. We'll be sending you our latest IDC analyst report, the role of DNS-based global server load balancing and ensuring application availability and continuity, in appreciation for your attendance today. I'd also like to mention that we have a special guest with us today. It looks like Joe Briante, who is one of our solutions engineers, is with us today. So welcome, Joe. Joe's kind of working in the background there. So thanks, Joe, for joining. So Roger, let's dig in. You know, we live in an on-demand world, and networks and apps, of course, are being asked to do more and more, connecting to more devices, handling ever-increasing IoT endpoints, automating, working across geographies and in the hybrid cloud, and not to mention fending off attacks from bad actors. Plus, there's privacy developments in play. Perhaps many of you have heard of the new General Data Privacy Requirement, or the GDPR, that went into effect in late May in Europe, and that really has far-reaching effects for anybody in Europe traveling anywhere in the world, including the United States. So systems must be enabled for data privacy protection, for business continuity, but it's inevitable, right, that some will fail, and when they do, Roger, what's the impact? You know, when data is compromised and when networks and apps are down or slow to respond?
Well, there's three main impacts. One, of course, is risk to customer satisfaction. Obviously, if they can't get to the apps, they're going to be unhappy, and that sort of subsequently results in the second item, which is impact the brand perception. Right? If your customers can't access your apps or your products online, then the brand's going to suffer. And then the final one is really about revenue, which is the most important of the three, right? Why do you have the apps in the first place? To bring in the revenue. So if those aren't working, you know, who can afford that kind of outage?
Well, and that's right. But, you know, there are tools, right? There's lots of tools that are out on the marketplace that can help companies, you know, reroute network traffic to better manage servers and data centers for business continuity.
That is true. The challenge with those tools, though, is that they can be very expensive to start with. And then the other challenge with them is they're usually somewhat complex in terms of deployment, and require you to really rethink the way that you architect your network and make significant changes to your network topologies. So that can be, you know, another additional challenge.
Yeah, and so fortunately, Infoblox offers DNS Traffic Control. We'll refer to it as DTC throughout the rest of the presentation today, and that really starts with DNS, right? I mean, that's the core, that's the key, and it combines DNS with intelligent GSLB, global server load balancing functionality, for next level automated and scalable high performance, and really a unified solution that's available so that you can see everything on the network through a single pane of glass. So today, we're going to show you how quickly and easily and affordably Infoblox can help you assure application availability. And we're going to explore a number of use cases as well. We'll talk about some of the load balancing challenges. Our goal really is to meet you in a discussion today that helps us understand your needs better, but also shows you how DTC can enable better performance and faster returns, and hopefully determine if our solution is the best fit for you. So we're going to go ahead and take a moment now and look at our agenda. We'll talk about some of the key IT initiatives and challenges. We're going to look at the DTC overview really and some of the advantages. We'll dig a little bit deeper into the IPAM integration and look at some of the use cases. And for those of you that are new to this call, we're also going to spend just a little bit of time talking about the latest NIOS 8.2 and 8.3 features. We'll touch on some case studies, and then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So that's really the agenda for today. So Roger, as we look at this, you know, some of the key load balancing initiatives and challenges, you know, the initiatives are really around application availability. People want high app availability. They want automated business processes and operations. They want reliable disaster recovery. But what are some of those challenges that many companies face now as they try to achieve that?
So the challenges there are obviously inaccessible apps, not being able to get to the apps that your host delivering to your customers. Even on a lesser scale is slowness or sluggishness in those applications. And then finally, the other challenges around ensuring that you're able to recover from disaster recovery. I know a lot of companies spend a lot of money in disaster recovery environments, and it seems like you know, they're always there and you never use them because maybe your primary site is always running. But if you do have a failover and you can't smoothly transition to your DR site, then all of that expenditure is for naught. And in addition to that, you have your app downtime. So that's another challenge.
Well, and then application performance is also a key driver, right? So people want reliable internet and intranet. Both of those must be up. They got to have quick response, not only for customers, but also for your internal employee productivity. And then, of course, it's critical, right, to have health checks prior to routing traffic. What good is it to send traffic to, a server that's down or perhaps is overwhelmed with traffic? And then, of course, you want to make sure that you have top performance no matter where in the world that you're at. But still, there are plenty of challenges to reaching those outcomes.
Great point, Bob.
And so there also is the idea of a central visibility and single pane of glass. So that's important. And then, of course, flexible automated monitoring. You want to be able to see where the traffic's being routed and perhaps what servers are being impacted. And then, of course, the notion of having reporting and analytics that can give you on-demand, up-to-the-moment insight. But again, Roger, right, there's some challenges to that.
Yeah, and the challenge there is around the lack of real-time visibility in the network. Just oftentimes you have a load balancer in place and it may or may not be doing its job, and you're not really sure exactly how the traffic's flowing through your network and why a load balancer might be routing traffic one way versus another. So getting visibility into that is key in just understanding your network, number one, but also seeing problems as they develop and even before they develop so that you can take proactive measures.
Yeah, and all of these things are important, but ultimately it comes down to the day-to-day, right? The manageability. It's got to be fast. It's got to be easy, inexpensive to deploy. You got to have a UI that is easy to use, that is intuitive, and you want to certainly automate those operations. Those are all things that companies are looking for. But there are some challenges, right?
Yeah, the challenges there are, a lot of the tools on the market to enable this type of capability are just costly. They're command line driven, so there's the human error element there. They're difficult to deploy because they're completely separate topologies, and then ultimately they're very complex solutions and somewhat difficult to use.
That's right. So let's take a look now, Roger, at the overview of DTC. Perhaps you can walk us through, what it is and how it works, and then, of course, for those that are managing applications and other technologists on the call today, what's in it for them?
Sure, happy to. So first of all, DTC is a global service load balancer, or GSLB. It's intelligent DNS basically, and directs clients to the best server based on whatever rules you defined. So we essentially manipulate the DNS response, and through that we allow you to do intelligent load balancing. And it delivers application availability, performance, visibility, and control, all of the stuff that we just talked about that people like to have. So the way that it works, again, I kind of mentioned it earlier, is we just manipulate the DNS response and return the IP address of the ideal server, again, based on rules that you define about what an ideal server is. And we have multiple different algorithms that allow you to define that rule set. We'll talk about those a bit in a couple more slides. We also, thanks to our heritage with IPAM and our deep functionalities there, we also have the ability to load balance on your private address, IP address space, or your internet space, which is a very unique feature to our load balancer. And then finally, the benefits that you get out of that are the uptime for your applications, simply through this DNS magic that we're doing. Of course, you get performance on your applications because we have rule sets that allow you to direct traffic through GSLB, through a GeoIP, or your attributes about your private routable IP address space, or round trip delays and various different methodologies. It's a single UI for both your DNS and your GSLB capability, so you don't have to have two separate DNS management mechanisms, one for your regular DNS and then one for your load balance DNS. It's integrated into one user interface. And then finally, in deployment terms, it's pretty quick and easy to deploy. You could stand up an Infoblox Grid in as little as 20 minutes with DTC on it. If you've already got an Infoblox Grid in place, it's literally like 5 minutes to install the DTC license. That feature just becomes available, and then you've got load balancing.
And that's way better than having to spin up, new hardware and of course build a big project and try and coordinate everybody and timing and fit it into an IT schedule. So it's nice to have that quick deployment. So right, Roger, we like to say that DTC really delivers about 80% of the functionality at about 20% of the cost of other competitive solutions that are out on the market.
Sure, yeah, depending on what your investment is and what functionality you need. But yeah, that's a good back of the napkin saying, if you will.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about, the value then of DTC.
Sure. So, one of the problems we talked about before was slow apps kind of result in fast complaints. So the value is DTC is going to improve your user experience and delivers that global load balancing. And it does it against your internet. As we talked about, IPAM integration allows us to understand your network topology and your private network address, and allow you to do basically internal GeoIP. But it's even better than GeoIP because it's not restricted to the typical limits of GeoIP. So another GeoIP is all about states, cities, regions, countries, that sort of thing. But we can actually get down to a more granular level if you've got a more granular level in your IPAM. So we can go down to building or floor or quadrant, or however you want to set up your GeoIP. So we can get very granular. You could even get down to the rack if you really wanted to. Of course, we have standard GeoIP, and we use Maxmind database, or you can upload a third party in the Maxmind format if you've already got a subscription to a GeoIP service. And then, of course, we've got the health monitors that enable flexible monitoring. And again, all of this rolls up to simplifying and improving your user experience and improving the performance of the applications. Now, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, so that's really good insight because it covers, internal productivity as well as customer support. But again, it's also, focused around having those health monitors that ensure that you know where you're directing traffic. It's going to the right place. You know that it's up, it's working properly, and that saves a lot of time.
So the second problem is, two or more server means lots of headaches. So we help reduce that capital and operating expense by delivering, a simple licensing model. If you've already got Infoblox in place, again, it's super easy to get DTC. It's available on most of our appliances. We have one or two that it doesn't run on, but if you've got our latest generation, it'll run on all of those, and it'll run on all but one, I believe, of our previous generation devices. It's a single UI again, so streamlined, consolidated UI for both DNS and GSLB. So you don't need to use separate tools to manage your DNS. It can all be in one place. And again, if you've got other DNS protocols out there, maybe you've got segments of your network on Microsoft, we can integrate with that as well. So now you're sort of consolidating 3 different DNS management interfaces into a single one through the Infoblox NIOS management console. And then finally, it's just easy to use. There's no crazy command line based rules. It's all graphical user interface and helps you really visualize the relationships between the servers that are out there, the monitors that are going against them, how they're pulled together, and how that all relates to the domain name that you're load balancing. So it's all very, very simple, and we'll see examples of that as we go through the demonstration today.
And Roger, so there's some advantages, right, with DTC, especially around efficient, intelligent DNS. Can you walk us through, how DTC really compares to other conventional load balancers?
Sure, happy to do that. So we're going to show an example of the data flow between the client and the application. On the left side, we've got conventional load balancers, and on the right side, we've got Infoblox DTC. So let's start off on the left side and take a look at how the traffic flow. So the client here in the top left, the guy on the computer, he wants to get to an application, myapp.abc.com. So the first thing that he's going to do is talk to the DNS system, which is that block, that gray and blue block here. The DNS system is going to come back to the client and say, hey, I'm not authoritative for this. You need to go talk to the load balancer. At which point he goes and talks to the load balancer. The load balancer will do some internal magic to identify which one of these is the best instance of the application for the client, at which point he will return the response back to the client, or it might even grab the content itself and proxy it back depending on how you have your load balancing set up and which load balancing solution you're using. But let's just assume that he's giving a DNS response back to the client, and the client then will go directly to the application and then grab the content and pull the content back, right? So you can see there's quite a bit of data exchange going on here. There's a lot of interaction. Not only that, the load balancer itself, this black device in the bottom center, is really kind of a middleman in a single point of failure. If that load balancer goes down, none of the applications are communicable, can be communicated with by the client. So let's take a look at how this looks compared to Infoblox. So Infoblox, we've got our client in the top left, and then in the bottom center, we've got our Infoblox appliance. And the way that this will work is the client will go looking for DNS to Infoblox for myapp.abc.com. And then in the background, Infoblox is already health checking to find out what the best instance of myapp.abc.com is. And then based on the health or whatever rules you define, based on those rules, we'll manipulate the DNS response directly back to the client so that the client knows what the best instance is to communicate with. And then the client will go directly to that, grab the data, and get the information back. So you can see we've kind of eliminated a middleman here and potentially reduced a single point of failure in the network topology. And then in addition to that, there's a whole bunch of other benefits by having the consolidated management of DNS and the powerful graphical user interface to manage it that we'll talk a little bit more about.
Yeah, and that's really good. I think one thing too to call attention to is again the intelligent DNS, because with Infoblox we do check that the IP is working, and that's very helpful because then it avoids outages just by providing only working addresses, and I think that makes a huge difference, right, Roger?
It does.
All right, so why don't we take a look then at how DTC supports the new development of GDPR. Perhaps some of you have heard, I mentioned it a few moments ago, the global data protection requirement that it went into effect May 25th, and it really has to do with protection of personal data, not only in the EU, but wherever someone for the EU may travel, including the United States or EMEA or Asia Pac. It doesn't matter, anywhere in the world. There are protections that impact even companies here in the US. And so if you don't know about GDPR, it's something to really pay attention to because the fines are huge, and it's really important to take consideration of that. But we do support it from a compliance standpoint. Roger, why don't you work through a little bit of the workflows here and show how that happens?
Sure. Yeah. So to get an understanding of this use case and how we're going to address it, let's first just take a look at a single kind of pool topology for DTC. So at the topmost level, we've got our load balance domain name, which is myapp.abc.com, whatever your app domain name is. The next level below that is a pool, and a pool is a logical grouping. It's just a group of servers, if you will. And then, of course, in the pool, you've got servers. Now, you can do load balancing at 2 layers here. You can do load balancing across pools, and you can do load balancing across servers. So with that in mind, let's take a look at a bigger topology example here, where we've got multiple pools. And in this case, we've got our Americas pool, our Europe pool, and our Asia pool. And what we want to do here is do geographical or geo-IP-based load balancing, especially in Europe, to make sure that all of the traffic coming from Europe for myapp.abc.com is going to servers that reside in Europe, so that we can ensure that there's GDPR compliance here. So that's what we're actually going to do in this first tier. So across pools, we're going to do geo-IP. All the Americas traffic goes to America, Europe traffic goes to Europe, and Asia traffic goes to Asia. And of course, if there's a failover in Asia, we can have that traffic go to Europe or America or vice versa. And then with all of these pools, we're going to do maybe performance-based load balancing across the servers. So maybe we have SNMP monitors that are going on those where we're looking at CPU utilization, and we're always directing clients to the system with the least CPU utilization. So there's an example of how the 2 different load balancing methodologies can be used across the different layers to get the maximum performance, but also ensure that you're staying compliant with GDPR.
Yeah, that's really good. So Roger, let's talk a little bit now about the balancing methods that DTC uses for managing pools and servers. What are some of the examples that we have and methods that we have for load balancing?
Sure. So we gave 2 examples here. We did geo-IP and we did performance-based, but let's, so again, we can do those at either layer, the pool layer or the server layer. And that's true with all of these load balancing methods. They can be done at either layer here. So we've got round robin, which would be the equivalent of having a DNS record with multiple IP addresses to it, right? So it's just going to go ABC, 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 and just never differentiate between A, B, or C. Unless, of course, one of them goes down, and then it'll go, let's say C goes down, then it'll be A, B, A, B, A, B. The next is a weighted round robin, which is the same thing, except you can, put more preference on one of the one of the elements. So imagine, if you will, you've got 3 servers. One of the servers is twice as powerful as the other 2. You can weight it so that it gets 50% of the traffic, and the other 2 get 25 and 25. But it's still, a round robin. The next load balancing methodology is topology, and this is where we'll do a geo IP or internal or external geo IP, or we'll do subnet-based redirection, or those other kind of topology-based load balancing mechanisms. And then the final one is global availability, and this is probably best suited for the DR use case. So, site 1 goes down, we want all of the traffic to go over to site 2. Or server 1 goes down, we want all of our traffic to go to server 2. So those are the 4 main load balancing methods.
Okay, and then there's also the advantage of having DTC intelligent health monitors as well. There's a number of them, and I think you'll find these as well to be competitive with what other companies are offering in the market. But Roger, why don't you take us through these as well?
Sure. Yeah. So you can only accurately load balance if you can only accurately determine whether an app is up or down. So that's where these health monitors come into play. The most common one is, of course, HTTP. Most of the apps out there these days are HTTP based. So of course we can do just basic HTTP availability checks, but we can also get into the weeds and do content checks against HTTP. So we can go out and look for a specific string to either exist or not exist with an HTTP check. So for example, maybe you've got when your software developers take an application offline, maybe they put up a sorry page or an unavailable page. So you might do an HTTP check so just an HTTP check will show that the web server is up and running, but you don't want to send traffic to that. So what you would do is use a detailed rule to go in and look for the content to make sure that sorry doesn't exist or unavailable doesn't exist, so that we don't send traffic to that from a load balancing perspective. The next is SNMP based. So this is where you would do something, a performance-based monitor. Maybe you're looking at CPU or memory utilization or disk utilization through SNMP interfaces. You can do that and then suggest the most performant server as a result of any SNMP OID. There's also, if you've got some proprietary application, we can do just a plain TCP handshake against the TCP port just to look for availability of the application itself. Of course, this isn't as rich as the other 2 options, but is a good catch-all to make sure that you can still identify that a proprietary application is available. We have a couple of protocols that support our telco companies. This product is used widely by a number of telcos, so we're supporting SIP and PDP protocols for them. And then finally, we have ICMP, which is your typical ping type activity. This allows us to do monitors based on round trip delay in redirect traffic based on latency, essentially.
Yeah, and another key thing to talk about with regard to DTC is the next level visibility, really, that Infoblox brings to the table. Having customizable reports and analytics available. We have a number of reports that have already been pre-built. We want to just highlight this one in particular. This is the DTC response distribution trend. So Roger, what is this about? What's important about it? Who needs it? That kind of thing. Can you walk us through this one?
Sure. Yeah. So this is one of the reports that we provide out of the box. So if you've got DTC and our reporting product, it just starts populating. You don't have to do anything particular, but it tracks the response of the DNS traffic control over time and gives you the trend. So you can see, basically the ebbs and flows of how your application is responding on the different nodes and how DTC is sort of spreading the traffic between the different nodes in your application. This is important for, of course, app owners to be able to get the visibility, but it's also important for network operation admins. This might be a dashboard that you have in your NOC, for example, where you can get better visibility into how applications are responding and when abnormalities happen. If you're looking at this trend and you see strange spikes or something like that, it will indicate to you that there's a large amount of latency for a given application. And again, this is coming from our health tests against the application. This is important because it helps, again, understand the distribution trends over time, which can be helpful for anomaly detection. Just because an application is still responding doesn't mean that it's performing optimally. So this will help you get a little bit of visibility into that if you don't already have tooling to help you do that. And as I mentioned before, it comes out of the box with the product. You don't have to do anything special to get it. If you've got both DTC and reporting, it just automatically populates for you. There's no additional work. And you can actually find this in the dashboards tab of the reporting tab within the NIOS interface. I kind of talked a little bit about the use point, but it helps you pinpoint a trend of any abnormal activity that's going on in here, and then help you identify which of the particular nodes in your application clusters might be potentially impacting performance or have something going on with those nodes.
Yeah, and so we've given a pretty good overview of the solution, but one thing that we'd like to bring to your attention is the leading use cases for DTC. Obviously, it's around internal and external DNS-based applications, disaster recovery, working with, of course, your Amazon Web or Microsoft Azure environments, perhaps doing on-premise Apex domain routing. We did mention GDPR already, but there's the possibility of doing zone consolidation, so you don't have to replicate and copy manually data when you're replicating zones. And then, of course, there's internal and hosted apps, like, for example, Microsoft Skype for Business, when you're managing global data centers or perhaps managing software as a service. There's a whole lot of different use cases, of course, that we can use for DTC. Roger, do you have any other thoughts around the use cases?
I do not.
All right, well, why don't we talk now just a moment about the IPAM integration. Roger, you alluded to it earlier, but we have the advantage of extensible attributes.
That is true, and we do have some slides here that sort of capture that, but I think what I'd like to do is take a moment and look at the actual demo system that we have here. So instead of looking at the slide, let's take a look at the actual system. So what we can see here is that we're looking at the NIOS interface. So if you're an Infoblox customer today, this should be familiar to you. What we can see here is we've got our IPAM tab. So this is our regular IPAM. You can see we've got a bunch of networks here. And these networks are, they're obviously private IP address space, so they're non-routable networks. And we've actually tagged them with a number of different, like what we call extensible attributes. But you can think of them like tags. It's just basically metadata that we can apply to these entries here. So that being the case, we can use that data to do geo-IP load balancing. So if we head over to our DNS section of the product here, you can see we've got all of our zones. This is where you would come in and create new zones and add records to those zones. But built right into the same interface is our traffic control tab. So if you click on traffic control, here's where we can see all of our load balance domains and the pools and the servers that make that up. So right now I'm filtering for only load balance domain names, but I can also add in the pools and the servers that make all of that up. So very easy to get visibility into what's going on. You can see over here on the right side that the representation is very much like the PowerPoint diagram that I showed earlier. We've got our load balance domain name, and then below that we've got our pool. And then we've got a number of servers that service that pool. And you'll notice that as I hover over these, I can get visibility into the relationship. So if I hover over this this server here, DC SFO-01, I can see which pools it's connected to. I can see the types of monitors that are running on it, and I can see the date that it was last updated in terms of the health checks that it's executing. I can also switch this around. Maybe I want to look at this visualization from the server perspective. So I can hover over the server, select my server virtualization, and it will show me all of the pools that that server is servicing. So here's that same server. We can see that it's servicing applications from 3 different pools here. So this, compared to a textual interface, this gives you a really clean understanding of the relationship of the devices in the network. Now, I was talking about our extensible attributes and load balancing earlier. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about that. So I can take those tags or those extensible attributes and use those to define how I'm going to do topology routing. So here we've got the different extensible attributes that I had set up over there. I've got region, country, site, and building. If you're familiar with GeoIP, you know that GeoIP has no understanding of site or building. The closest it's going to be able to get you is a city. So we're actually getting a more granular GeoIP, if you will, load balancing on, this could be, it could be public or private routable IP address space, depending on how you set up your extensible attributes. But we've defined that the topology is region, country, site, building for this example. And what I can do now is create a topology rule that takes advantage of that. So if I go to our manage topology rules, create a new topology rule here, I can add a new one. And I'm going to say I want to direct traffic to where region equals North America, country equals USA, site equals New York City, and building equals building 3. So now if any requests come in, I'm going to send them to a specific location that I would define, or IP address rather, or application that I define here. So that's how we're able to link the non-routable IP address space to load balancing as an example. All right, switching back to the slide deck. Let's jump past the slides that I just covered in the demo and take a look at some of the new features. Bob?
Yeah, so we wanted to cover just quickly, and necessarily we won't, just because of time, go into super amount of detail here, but we did want to share with you some new features that have come out with NIOS 8.2. 8.2 has been out for a while, but 8.3 also was recently released. And so with 8.2, we have load balancing using the RTD or SNMP. And so Roger, why don't you just talk to us quickly about that. We'll just touch on these briefly as we kind of work through.
Yeah, so we touched on this briefly as we were looking at the different types of monitors earlier, but to recap, we can do ICMP-based round-trip delay to direct traffic to the quickest responding application instance, or we can use SNMP to actually go out and check the server's performance levels through different, whatever OID you want to check, and direct traffic based on the actual performance of the server. So those two features were added in 8.2.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, that's important obviously because the data centers and servers vary throughout the day in terms of their loads, and static load balancing configurations don't really respond to network changes. And so this really gives you a good insight in terms of application response time, and you know, can help you reduce management costs because it automates those responses to network outages, and then of course the data center server load. So a good feature add there. The next one, Roger, that we have is MultiTier health check support. Why don't you take us through this one as well?
Sure. So the MultiTier health check is, imagine you've got a 3-layer application. You've got web, app, and then database. This allows you to define a health check rule that will say if one of the 3 tiers are not responding, then flag the whole application or instance as down and direct traffic elsewhere. And it's important because you might not have, an application might misbehave if one of the components is down, but still appear to be delivering, but to the user, it's not. So what monitoring sees versus what user sees are two different things. So that being able to have this multi-tier check is a way to mitigate anything like that from happening. Ultimately the benefit is it ensures that when an application is not performing as expected, we're not sending users to that application instance.
Yeah, that's a helpful one to have. With 8.3, also just we recently released that there is a new feature around state persistence. So, Roger, how about that? That seems to be a pretty important one.
Yeah, so what this allows us to do is synchronize the client and app affinity across our across DTC devices. So this is important when you've got an application that requires a stateful connection between the app and the client. So if there's some sort of failover event between DTC servers, that state will persist, and the affinity between the client and the app is also persisted, and therefore it doesn't prompt the user to log in, or you don't lose, whatever cookie variables you had stored in memory or anything like that, and it is a transparent failover to the end user.
Yeah, that's a good one. Not having to log in again and re-authenticate makes it much more user-friendly. So that's a good one as well. We also introduced service records support. So DTC, of course, has native support for SRV records. Roger, how about this one?
So this one is basically enables DTC to provide load balancing support for SRV records. It's important because it just expands the load balancing capabilities for DTC to include SRV, and the benefits, of course, are that it makes the DTC more all-around functionable for full capacity load balancing. An example use case around why someone would want to do this is there's a lot of VoIP and video conferencing applications out there that use SRV records. So being able to load balance those ensures that you've got that solid connection, whether you're looking at somebody or you're talking to somebody, and that you've got that uninterrupted sort of telephony experience thanks to load balancing.
Another one that we have to share with you is CSV Export and Import. That's actually really helpful to have these common tools for CSV, especially around migrations, right? So Roger, what thoughts do you have on this one?
So yeah, absolutely, for migrations and for even net new loadouts. So a lot of the competitive products in the marketplace use textual-based configuration files. So it's pretty easy to take those. I won't say easy because easy is subjective, but you can take those textual-based configuration files and parse them into CSV configurations and then bulk load them into the DTC product. And it just enables the ability to export and import configurations in general, even beyond above and beyond migration from different products. So you could take CSV backup, make some large scale manipulations, and then re-ingest that CSV and sort of bulk change your load balancing configuration. So it's all about just agility and flexibility. And just making mass changes, if you will, to your load balancing configurations.
All right, that's good. And then also we have the new feature around independent backup. So what do we mean by independent backup here, Roger?
That's a good question, Bob. So previously, you could only back up DTC by backing up the entire grid. So if you wanted to restore a DTC configuration, you had to restore your grid configuration, which meant if you made DNS changes or if you made DHCP changes, those would all get rolled back when you did the restore, all because you wanted to roll back your DTC change. So what we did was, and also prior to 8.3, we didn't have CSV import export, so you couldn't just load an old CSV. So we've actually got both features now. DTC independent backup allows you to back up DTC separately from the rest of the grid. There's no CSV import export. We just take a snapshot, if you will, of the configuration, and then you can roll that snapshot back without having to manage any CSVs. It's just a nice streamlined way to do a backup here.
Okay, and then one of the other ones that, and then really the last one that we introduced with 8.3 is government cloud support. So what this is really is around the fact that DTC can work on multiple FedRAMP infrastructure clouds, and that includes AWS GovCloud as well as Microsoft Azure Government. So we have some folks on the call today that work in the government space, and that's really important because it really confirms our next level commitment to NIOS, and at the same time it really demonstrates our dedication to top security standards, especially required by federal, state, local government agencies, and mainly the supply chain. So again, this supports government cloud initiatives, also for integrators that work directly with federal agencies. And just a couple of key points to note here. We've been in AWS GovCloud since back in August of 2016. We are certified for Microsoft Azure. We have passed FIPS 140-2 requirements, so we're waiting for the official announcement that's coming from NIST. We expect that within the next couple of months. We also have Common Criteria EAL2 certification. That came out with the NIOS 7.1. It was redone again with 8.2. And then we also are on the approved products list for the Defense Information Systems Agency, or DISA, and that supports the DoD infrastructure. So again, Infoblox is absolutely committed to supporting government agencies, and this gives you a little bit of an overview. We have that discovery capability with 8.3 that enables us to be in Microsoft Azure Government as well. And so just another update for those of you in the government space. So Roger, why don't we go ahead and talk now about a couple of case studies. We'll talk about this first one. And so many of you know the Hershey Company. They are in the enterprise market, dealing in the food vertical. This is, America's chocolate company, right? They've been making candy for nearly 125 years. They have about 15,000 employees worldwide. And Roger, what were some of the issues that Hershey faced when they came to talk to us?
So their challenge was that they wanted to improve the user experience for their internal apps and reduce the management costs, and they were having slowness and challenges like that. And then they also wanted the apps to provide better performance in general, and then they needed DR also for those applications. So we were able to deliver for them in a unique way a way to knock out all three of those, right? So we improved the performance through GeoIP, but we were able to do it on their internal applications and ensure that they were getting best performance across their internal applications. So the outcome was, a single console to improve the administrator user experience, improve DR, and we actually reduced their management cost because we eliminated an entire section of infrastructure that they were using to do load balancing previously.
All right, and then there's another one that we have, the Tier 1 mobile telecom. So we can't exactly tell you who this is, but we can bet you probably could guess. Obviously, they're in the telecom space. Their focus was on application availability, and you can understand why, right? Because they're, as a Tier 1 mobile telco operator, they were using Infoblox and Packet Core and subscriber-facing network. And their challenge was, making Wi-Fi calling available when the subscriber is in their home country. Bill shock was the big challenge there when the subscriber was roaming, since Wi-Fi calling, of course, was charged at the international rates, and we've all been there. We've gotten a big bill, and so that was really important to be able to manage that. So Infoblox came in with our DTC solution, it uses the subscriber's location to only allow access to Wi-Fi calling when they were in their home country. So a huge advantage for them, short time to market, seamless integration within the existing grid. And ultimately it made their customers a lot more happy because that way they weren't incurring those big roaming charges. And it was really critical in terms of delivery and reduced management costs as well. So another example there. And Roger, why don't we look at this global financial company as well? So this one is in the banking and finance space, and they were focused obviously on application response and availability. You know, when you're doing securities brokerage, you know, timing is of absolute criticality. It's a financial trading firm. So Roger, why don't you talk to us about this one?
Yeah, so the mantra here is milliseconds matter, right? when you're in the trading space. But basically, you know, they needed maximum response time, maximum availability. They had built out a very large Apache Mesos clusters to help do with the large volume of trading that they're doing. And you know, again, milliseconds matter, so any amount of downtime costs money. We were able to simply they are already Infoblox customers. We were able to simply add the DTC license, which was a significantly lower cost than their standalone GSLB environment. We were able to completely eliminate actually, we were significantly cheaper than just their maintenance renewal. So it was a great cost savings to them, and ultimately they got the performance that they needed and significantly reduced their management cost for having a completely separate GSLB infrastructure.
All right, so Roger, we have just a few minutes left. Maybe what we'd like to do is just do a quick wrap up on DTC summary, and then maybe, or perhaps we should just address some questions at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone. If you have a question, please go ahead and share it now. We'd love to see if we can address any questions or concerns you have.
We had a question come into the chat that I'll address, and that was around the data connector. So the data connector is a tool that we have that allows us to share data with our ecosystem. It's used with our reporting tool. This question came in when we were showing the reporting section, and the question is, if we have the data connector, can you send the DTC reporting data to an external Splunk instance? The answer to that is no. The data connector only sends query and response data. So you will see the query for the GSLB, but you won't have that linkage to see, you know, how the load.
I think we lost you there, Roger.
Did you get that?
No, we didn't. How the load was the last thing we heard.
So you wouldn't see how the load was handled by the load balancers and how each of the nodes was responding.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Any other questions that we have? There's a couple that came in too, but I want to give a chance for people to ask the questions.
There, can you hear me?
Barely. Can you speak up?
So just want to check, do you guys support like custom health monitors and custom of the other, you know, GSLB vendors out there?
So we don't have anything customized currently, just the ones that we covered in the presentation.
And is it in your roadmap, or is it too far down the pipeline right now?
It is in the roadmap, but it's not committed to a release right now. So we can't really give you any additional information on it. It is a feature that we would like to get to very soon. What we're looking at is an expect style kind of scriptability where you can, you know, send data and expect a response and do sort of more complex scripted based monitors.
Okay, good. And the other question I had is about, you know, how does your API access the pricing? Is there any support for multi-tenancy sales? Because with API access, we currently face, at least in my organization, is that we don't want a particular application owner to be able to meddle with the other application owners, right? So So do you guys have any support for those kind of things?
So I'm sorry, your question is about permissions around API?
Permissions, and will it support like a multi-tenant situation where we can restrict customers to specific FQDNs and pools and servers around that?
That is a question that is unfortunately beyond my technical knowledge. I know we do have a deep role-based access control system, and I know that objects are protected by role-based access control, but I don't think it quite meets multi-tenancy requirements that you might be looking for, but we can definitely restrict access based on the role-based access control system we have.
Okay. That's all for me. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? Okay, so Roger, we're almost at time here. Just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. We have a number of resources that are available through our website that you can go to. There are data sheets, there are white papers, we have solution notes, there are videos on YouTube. There are case studies as well with Hershey if you want to read that in more detail. We are sending out the IDC report, the analyst report to you as well. Please engage us if you have specific GSLB needs. We're glad to show your use case in a lab, for example. You can request a cost-benefit analysis. All of that, of course, you can reach out to info@infoblox.com. And you could call us at our number 1408-986-4000. And so we do appreciate your participation today. Thank you for joining on behalf of Roger Barlow. Thanks for joining us, and we wish you a good day. Thanks again. Take care.